Good morning, everyone. This is Pastor David, Berean Baptist Church, Fayetteville, North Carolina, coming to you with the news and focus this morning. Been a while since I've been on by myself, but here we go. And the article I'm bringing you is actually a pretty old article, but somebody reposted it this morning on Facebook, and I read it, and it kind of jumped out at me. Of course, it's somebody likes this article, and so that always makes me wonder. The article was published Wednesday, January 23rd, 2013. So we're a little behind on this, but I checked through Sermon Audio a little bit, and I don't think anybody did a commentary on this. But this is from Salon.com, so you know what bent that is. We're going to come from a far liberal point of view with Salon. And the title of the article is, "So What If Abortion Ends Life?" And the subtitle that Mary Elizabeth Williams, the author, writes is, "I believe that life starts at conception, and it's never stopped me from being pro-choice." So here's an interesting perspective. It's somebody who says life begins at conception, just like a Bible believer, a pro-life stance would. But she says, so what if abortion ends life? How do you get to that position? Well, let's see what she has to say. She says, of all the diabolically clever moves the anti-choice lobby, notice not pro-life, anti-choice, has ever pulled, surely one of the greatest has been its consistent co-opting of the word life. Life. Who wants to argue with that? Who wants to be on the side of not life? That's why the language of those who support abortion has for so long been carefully couched in other terms. While opponents of abortion eagerly describe them as pro-life, the rest of us have had to scramble around with not nearly as big-ticket words like choice and reproductive freedom. The life conversation is often too thorny to even broach, yet I know that throughout my own pregnancies, I never wavered for a moment in the belief that I was carrying a human life inside of me. I believe that's what a fetus is, a human life, and that doesn't make me one iota less solidly pro-choice. How about that? I really enjoy the idea of somebody using logic here. I appreciate the idea of, well, I can't run from the idea that this is life. Okay, so that's the good part of the article. We may not agree so much as the article goes on. Because think about that. She's saying this is life. This life began at conception. There's no other way to argue this. They've always been human beings, and yet she's okay with abortion. As Roe v. Wade enters its fifth decade, we find ourselves at one of the most schizo moments in our national relationship with reproductive choice. I love reproductive choice. In the past year, we've endured the highest number of abortion restrictions ever. That's interesting. Yet support for abortion rights is at an all-time high, with 7 in 10 Americans in favor of letting Roe v. Wade stand. I guess that's all depends on who you talk to. Allowing for reproductive choice in all or most cases. That's a stunning 10% increase from just a decade ago. And in the midst of this unique moment, Planned Parenthood has taken the bold step of reframing the vernacular, moving away from the easy and easily divisive words life and choice. Instead, as a new promotional film acknowledges, it's not a black and white issue. It's a move whose time is long overdue. It's important because when we don't look at the complexities of reproduction, we give far too much semantic power to those who try to control it, and we play into the sneaky, dirty tricks of the anti-choice lobby, not pro-life, anti-choice lobby, when we on the pro-choice side squirm so uncomfortably at the ways in which they've repeatedly appropriated the concept of life. Here's the complicated reality in which we live. All life is not equal. That's from a liberal perspective. All life is not equal. Everywhere else in their worldview, equality is a paramount virtue to extol. In all cases, it has to be equality. But now we go to the point that all life is not equal. That's a difficult thing for liberals like me to talk about, lest we wind up looking like death panel loving, kill your grandma and your precious baby stormtroopers. Yet a fetus can be a human life without having the same rights as the woman in whose body it resides. She's the boss. Her life and what is right for her circumstances and her health should automatically trump the rights of the non-autonomous entity inside of her. Always. All right. So, it can be a human life without having the same rights as another human life. This would never fly in any other discussion from the liberal mindset. It would never work. You can't limit anybody on any basis in that mindset, let alone just the idea of life. And yet the rules change in this situation. When we on the pro-choice side get cagey around the life question, it makes us illogically contradictory. I have friends who have referred to their abortions in terms of scraping out a bunch of cells, and then a few years later were exultant over the pregnancies that they unhesitatingly described in terms of the baby and this kid. That's really good. Because in one situation it's cells, and in another situation it's a baby. It just depends on if you want it or not, right? I know women who have been relieved at their abortions and grieved over their miscarriages. Why can't we agree that how they felt about their pregnancies was vastly different? But that's pretty silly to pretend that what was growing inside of them wasn't the same. Fetuses aren't selective like that. They don't qualify as human life only if they're intended to be born. Again, I actually agree. When we try to act like a pregnancy doesn't involve human life, we wind up drawing stupid semantic lines in the sand. First trimester abortion versus second trimester versus late term, dancing around the issue, trying to decide if there's a single magic moment when a fetus becomes a person. Are you human only when you're born? Only when you're viable outside of the womb? Are you less of a human life when you look at a tadpole than when you look like a tadpole than when you can suck on your thumb? Right? This is revolutionary, and it's also disturbing all at the same time, because your usual pro-choice perspective is, well, the baby's not viable, so it's not a human being. These same people, if they found a one-celled organism on Mars, would jump up and down with the idea that there was life on Mars. But a developing fetus, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, all the way up through 9 months, we have to decide if it's a human being or not. It's ridiculous, and at least she is pointing that out. Now, the disturbing side of that is, I know it's a child, I know it's life, but sometimes life isn't as valuable as other life, and sometimes that life needs to be ended based on the decision of another human being. Right? That's the disturbing part of this. She says, we're so intimidated by the wing nuts, we get spooked out of having these conversations. We let the arch conservatives browbeat us with the concept of life, using their scare tactics on women, pushing for indefensible violations like forced ultrasounds. God forbid that we allow women to see what's going on before they participate in an abortion. Why? Because when they wave the not even accurate notion that abortion stops a beating heart, I don't know how that's not even accurate, they think they're going to trick us into some damning admission. They believe that if we call a fetus a life, they can get on the road of making abortion murder. Yeah, logically. And I think that's what concerns the heck out of all of us, out of all those who support unrestricted reproductive freedom. Think about that, unrestricted reproductive freedom. Where does that stop? After the birth? Because the child surely isn't viable in those first couple years of life, so why not after birth abortion? But we make choices about life all the time in our country. We make them about men and women in other nations. We make them about prisoners in our penal system. We make them about parents with terminal illnesses and accident victims. Notice how we go to a straw man argument here. We go to something that has nothing to do with what we've got over here. We support the death penalty. Is that the same thing as killing a child in the womb? Obviously not. We still have passionate debates about the justifications of our actions as a society, but we don't have to do it while being bullied around by the vague idea that if you say we're talking about human life, then the jig is up, rights-wise. I love how they're bullied around, and she says that 70% of the country supports abortion. How much of a bully can happen at that point? It seems absurd to suggest that the only thing that makes us fully human is the short ride out of some lady's vagina. Isn't that a nice way to put it? That distinction may apply neatly legally, but philosophically, surely we can do better. Instead, we let right-wingers perpetuate the sentimental fiction that no one with a heart, and certainly no one who's experienced the wondrous miracle of family life, can possibly resist tiny fingers and tiny toes growing inside a woman's body. We give a platform to the notion that, as Christina Locke opined in a recent New York Times op-ed, motherhood had slyly changed us. We went from basking in the rights that feminism had afforded us to silently pledging never to exercise them. Nice mommies don't talk about abortion. Don't they? The majority of women who have abortions, and 1 in 3 American women will. How about that? 1 in 3 American women will have an abortion, are already mothers. And I can say anecdotally that I'm a mom who loved the life she incubated from the moment she peed on those sticks. She's real classy. And is also now well over 40 and in an experimental drug trial. If by some random fluke I learned today I was pregnant, you bet I'd have an abortion. I'd have the world's greatest abortion. My belief that life begins at conception is mine to cling to, and if you believe that it begins at birth or somewhere around the second trimester or when the kid finally goes to college, that's a conversation we can have, one that I hope would be respectful and empathetic and fearless. We can't have it if those of us who believe that human life exists in utero are afraid we're somehow going to flub it for the cause. In an op-ed on why I'm pro-choice in the Michigan Daily this week, Emma Manier stated quite perfectly that some argue that abortion takes lives, but I know that abortion saves lives too. She understands that it saves lives not just in the most medically literal way, but in the roads that women who have choice then get to go down, in the possibilities for them and for their families, and I would put the life of a mother over the life of a fetus every single time, even if I still need to acknowledge my conviction that the fetus is indeed a life worth sacrificing. A life worth sacrificing. Where does that stop? Does that stop with children with disabilities? Does that stop with older people with disabilities? Does that stop with children with Down syndrome, with autism, with multiple sclerosis? Where does this stop? What is a life worth sacrificing? Now, I do appreciate the honesty here, because she's gone from the ridiculous notion of, well, the health of the mother. Well, if you do a little research on that, you realize that the physical health of the mother is very rarely in jeopardy when it comes to childbirth. If that's a situation, we've got a whole different conversation to have. That's not really the abortion conversation. That's a different idea altogether, and that is the extreme minority, as well as the rape cases as well. Okay, those are extreme minority positions, and she says life is not physically literal. It's the fact that I need to be successful. I need to accomplish things. I need to do things in my life. And with this child, with this life dragging me down, I certainly can't do that. So I need to sacrifice this life so I can have a better life for myself. Well, what does that mean? I think in many cases, your decision making in having this pregnancy in the first place maybe impacts you more in your future decisions in your life than the pregnancy itself. Perhaps a child would refocus your energy. Perhaps a child would get you focused on what you need to do in your life. I'm not saying it's an ideal situation, but the fact is your actions have consequences. And in some cases, this can be not so much a consequence, it can actually be a blessing. I'm sure some people that are listening, some women that are listening out there, can give a testimony of an unplanned pregnancy that ended up being an absolute blessing to their life. That ended up being an absolute blessing to their family. To just chalk up pregnancy as a medical condition, as a women's choice issue, as an inconvenience. Nobody wants to live in this world where one life is more valuable than another life. Nobody wants to go down this road, and I know she doesn't view it that way in her everyday life. It's okay to do it here with a fetus that doesn't defend itself, with something that I can move the goalpost, I can change the arguments, and I can make this into a medical condition. But what happens when we expand this narrative? It's what we've talked about with every other issue. When the narrative gets expanded, things start to fall apart. If we're going to base marriage on I should be able to marry whoever I love, well, where does that stop? If I'm going to say from a biblical perspective, well, I believe this in the Bible, but I don't believe that in the Bible. Well, where does that stop? See, we like to use this in a philosophical position, and it sounds great on paper, and it sounds like it may work on paper, but when you apply this in the real world, the ripples that go out from the stone that you just dropped in the water are far-reaching. It reaches the very edges of the pond, and it affects the whole system. And so when you can sit here and say, you know what, there are lives worth sacrificing, where does that stop? Because you've just put yourself above another. You've just put one life above another. You have cheapened the idea of what life is. And that's the disturbing part, because before, pro-choice people would run from this argument, like she said, because logically there's nowhere to stand. If you say this is a life, and you are taking a life, then isn't that not murder? There was a case in Colorado where a woman was attacked, 7 months pregnant, the baby was cut out of her stomach. Can you imagine the horror of that? And Colorado may not charge this woman with murder because they have to protect the abortion lobby in the state. We don't want to call that baby 7 months in the womb that was taken out of her and died as a result. We don't want to call that a life and charge this woman with murder because that would hurt our position on abortion. This woman says, hey, forget about that. Sometimes you make tough choices. Sometimes you put value on your life above other lives. Sometimes you take somebody's life because they're an inconvenience. Is that the world that we really want to live in? That's the liberal mindset. So when we talk about reproductive choice and her women's health issues, that's not at all what she's saying. She is changing the paradigm of what life is and what value is, and I don't think that's a world any of us want to live in. If you have any comments, post them directly to this podcast. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.